we said, we want to talk about how do we survive and thrive in this crisis environment, and how do you make those decisions and take the emotions out of that. And as Alan said, we're going to talk about the first two topics. When you look at your sales forecasting, how do you make informed decisions so that when you decide to cut people or you decide to change and pivot in your strategy, how do you decide what that is? It's one of the most difficult decisions that a lot of this customers have to make right now. It's quite often not data-based, and therefore it paralyzes them. And then the second point, I'm going to take you through a actual action plan for you to how you can identify what are some of the highest risks that you face, look at your current environment and how you can plan for that. The sales forecasting I'm going to browse through, it is not rocket science, but it is something that I want you guys to all be familiar with. The three top things you need to look at as any business owner when you want to look at your forecast is the quality of your data, the timing or the age of your data, and the source of the data. So let me use an example here. The first thing is, in this case, thinking is bad for business. And what I want you to think about here is, if you ask your sales leader or your sales team, what do you think customer ABC is, their revenue is going to look like in Q3, and they start with, I think it is, then you have to say to them, no, I'm not interested in what you're thinking. What did you actually talk to the customer about? What did their forecast say? Because that, if they think about certain things and they haven't had that quality conversation, that's a red flag. Typically, you would like to categorize your customers in a few different ways. So if you talk to your sales leader or again the sales team, and they are treating the data and the revenue forecast for all your customers the same, that is another red flag. You might want to look at your sales and categorize it as an example on who are your customers that, based on your industry, are growth customers. So you know that the sales will come even in spite of COVID, and they might even be increases in that. And did the sales forecast that the sales team give you compensate or make provision for growth in that industry? The second one, secure. That business is going to come in, and therefore whatever is forecasted, you can take to the bank. However, have they looked at customers that truly are at risk, and how have they compensated the revenue forecast as it relates to that segment of your customer list? The fourth one is that unknown. And this is a way out for the sales team where they really just don't know, or the customer just have not been able to give them information. And that information you typically want to disregard. Obviously, you don't want to include that in your forecast as you decide on revenue forecast and what financial planning you might want to make. The second thing that's critical is the timing or the age of your data. And I call this the rotting indicator. A lot of business owners right now want up-to-date information, and they want the sales team to go and have conversations with the customer every other day. But the higher your revenue size of the product is that you sell, and the longer the sales cycle, the less frequent your sales updates, your check-ins with the customers should typically be. So have a conversation with the sales team of when last have you had a conversation with the customer. In COVID environment, I direct my clients to say, yes, a QBR, a quarterly business review, is critical. Having said that, if you have really good customers, they understand how their forecast might change month to month. So ask them if you could at least have a monthly check-in with them on how the forecast for the next quarter might have changed based on orders that did or did not happen from their customers. So you want to allocate a rotting indicator to your number and say, this data is no longer valid. What do I want to do? But as I said, be careful with putting too much of a burden on the sales guys. If you're going to call your procurement manager at your largest customer every other week or every week, you're going to annoy them, and the quality of the data you're going to get from them is going to go down. So allocate something like this and have it as part of your decision making when you qualify the data that you share. The next part of it is, what's the source of the data? So again, if you take all the sales information that the sales team has entered into the CRM and you just take it at face value, you are in for trouble. two reasons. You typically have, and there's a few other categories, but there are two different things you need to look at. Who is this individual, and what is his or her sales history for forecasting? There are those that are optimists, and they are always going to forecast higher, and the actual number is also always going to come in lower. But then there are those that are the sandbaggers that are always forecasting a lower number than what's actually happening. So how are you adjusting and making adjustments based on who the actual salesperson is, to get a closer indication of what the numbers might actually be? And again, the other aspects around that is you might want to look at it and say, well, let me look at the top 20 customers that's going to contribute 80% of my revenue, and let's do a bit more of a deep dive into those customers so that you can judge the forecast that the sales team has given you, and make adjustments accordingly to that. So that's at a very high level. Three key things that you can go and do to reconsider your sales forecasting, specifically how it's going to affect your top line, because we all know in the COVID times, you need to make informed decisions as it relates to what finances you need for your working capital in the future. The next item I want to talk to you guys is about your agility assessment for the company. This is going to be more of a practical example that I want you guys to think about, but there are a number of areas that you are that you should be most concerned about in your business. These are the areas of the biggest uncertainty in predicting your business, and that could have the biggest impact in your business if you don't plan appropriately for them. So to make it simple, make a list of the two biggest areas that of uncertainty in your business that will impact sales. Then look at those two areas and say, what are the least moderate and greatest impact that they might have for that uncertainty? And then you create a slide, typically something like this. I typically suggest customers, and in the workshops we do with them, we do 3x3, so it's 9 blocks. Can you do it in 4? Yes. But the problem with 4 is there is a very, very fine line between, is it a worst case or a best case scenario? Doing more than 3x3, it becomes too complicated for you to judge the different scenarios. So I typically suggest take this 3x3. On the left-hand side, you will say uncertainty topic number 1. What is the worst case or the greatest impact, negative impact, versus the best case, and the same with the other one. And then you map this out. And this might look something like this. So in this case, this client has said, if I am, first of all, let's look at the bottom section. If I have to put some of my sales team on furlough, or if I fire some of the sales team and I have to bring people back on once business picks up, what is the impact going to be to ramp my sales team up and get my sales pipeline back up to speed? At the same time, you might say, what is the biggest challenge that I'm going to run into to get my supplier ramped up? And so, as you can see, top right corner is you have a quick recovery of the sales team and a quick a ramp-up period from your supplier. Now, you need to look at these scenarios and say, what is the likelihood of each of these 9 items or scenarios actually playing out? And you might say, well, it is highly unlikely that I'll be able to do a quick ramp up because I know my supplier and I know the sales team, and I know there's maybe a longer ramp team for the sales team. So by looking at your environment, you might disqualify, or you might cross out 2 or 3 or 4 of these scenarios. Once you've identified the ones that you are left with, your conversation should then be about stress testing. So given your current team, the leadership team that you have, your approaches that you have, your infrastructure that you have, how would they fare versus each of these scenarios? Right. So you might find that your current leader, your current sales team are very reactive, they are slow to ramp, and therefore you are more at risk based on these scenarios. What you would also want to look at is what would your revenue and your profitability impact be for each of these scenarios? And you need to make sure that you have your ducks in a row for each of the scenarios you're left out with, because you might not, because they are the topics that are that has the highest impact with the highest uncertainty associated with them, you need to compensate for all of them. So is your working capital going to help you through all of those environments? Is your revenue forecasting and your profitability going to help you through all of those scenarios? Will your current strategic initiative that you've done help you through each of these? Several customers have pivoted and they decided they want to compensate for the challenges that they've had. So they might have had some strategic initiatives already in the last 2 or 3 months. But how are those initiatives that you implemented or the changes that you've implemented either enabling you or putting you in a disadvantaged position against each of those scenarios? And then last but not least, how do you determine if each of these if you should continue with them, if you should accelerate with any of your initiatives, specifically as it relates to those? So this is a very simple but very, very effective way for you to make decisions based on your current environment. If you plan for those worst case scenarios, you can mitigate the risk and you can make data-informed decisions. So take the emotion out of it of, am I going to have to let go of some of my manufacturing team, my skilled workforce, some of my sales team, whatever the case might be, based on having done this scenario planning. What Walt is going to talk about in a future section is how do you further take that emotion out of the conversation. But by having done this scenario planning, it makes it a lot easier to go through that. I do want to just mention one more topic. We do offer complimentary crisis resource evaluations for you. So we do 1-hour complimentary calls for people to say, let's help you look at your sales and finance strategy. I'm not personally dealing with the finance strategy. We have fractional CFOs in our partnerships that can help in that area, that's willing to do those complimentary sessions. We also look at what's your crisis action plan, similar to what we just looked at, or others to say, have you evaluated your situation properly? A big item right now is compensation plans. How am I having the right compensation plans for sales being low to still drive the right behavior? And then last but not least, what does my resource utilization look like? If you don't have the right people in the right seat, how do you make sure you have them? And how do I make sure I have the right people to deliver on this new strategy that I have to follow up with? So if any of you are interested in any of those conversations, please follow up with me after the call. I'll respond to the email from the surveys. With that, Walt, I'm going to hand over back to you. Alan, any questions? Sorry, you're on mute, Alan.
I followed the instructions. I muted myself. The one thing came to mind in senior sales and financial strategy there, Daniel. What are your tips or strategies for combining, revenue forecasting, like you talked about, just into your overall forecasting? I'm sure that that's something that a lot of people are thinking about right now.
Yeah, Alan, that's a very, very good question. So what we see with most clients right now is they don't do a proper financial strategy. They might have an idea of what their finances look like, but they don't do a proper financial strategy. Their CPA might have looked at it, so it's more of a, let's look at my history as what the future might represent. And that's a very... That's a big risk that a lot of clients face themselves into. So I would really recommend that they work with a proper CFO or a fractional CFO to work on that financial strategy. But the CFO or the finance strategy obviously can only be properly implemented once you've had your sales forecasting done, because that is the thing that ultimately drives your top line revenue. Don't rely on either one of these two elements on their own. It's a combination of the two models that ultimately help you with your revenue forecasting. Your revenue forecast should typically be able to be at least 3 to 6 months out. And again, if you work with your CFO and your VP of sales together, they will allocate certain likelihoods on the revenue forecast. The further out, there's obviously more uncertainty associated with that, but you can allocate certain probabilities for that. And that's what your CFO will help you with on that revenue forecasting and what finances from a working capital perspective is required for you to execute. So recommendation, bring in a true expert from a finance perspective, a CFO that helps you with that side of it, and someone that can help you with your proper finance, your revenue forecasting, so you have a true picture. Any other questions?
Awesome. What about, I love how you refer to it as a rotting indicator, going back to the rotting indicator a little bit, and not wanting to necessarily push on the clients that much or be over communicating with them, but potentially if it comes to individual contributors where time is critical right now, and having great data, what are your tips if you're just continuing to see that same rotting every week, every 2 weeks, every month? Is there anything you can really do, or you help strategize with people on how to start moving that forward and making some change?
Yeah, there's two indicators here. We've had a quarterly business review with one of my clients last week, and their chief procurement officer told us, as soon as I have an idea what's going to happen in Q3, I will tell you, right? Because unfortunately, some of our clients are just completely in the dark. And so therefore, you are not able to update your forecast. And what I typically say to clients then is, let's get an indication of what their purchases has been for the last 2 months, and let's compare it with what their run rate business was like for the last year. So for the similar 2 months. So if the purchases for the last 2 months have been, let's say, 40% of what their run rate business for the similar period last year has been, allocate that 20% probability to their revenue for the rest of the year. So you can make some intelligence adjustments to that if the client can't give you more information. But the biggest issue is actually the salespeople. They just do not talk to the customer. And that's typically a big red flag that you don't have the right person in the right seat. If you have the right profile of a salesperson that drives the right behavior and is not afraid of a phone and being able to build that relationship with the customer, you will probably not have that rotting indicator. So the moment your rotting indicator increases, it's one of those leading indicators that you don't have the right person in the right seat, and you might want to make some changes. All right. I want to just give enough time for Walt. I know we're running a little behind. So let me hand over to Walt. Walt, the floor is yours.
When do we go? Good deal. So can y'all hear me? Alan, yes. Give me a thumbs up.
Yep.
So when's the hard stop?
We have until at least 1, but we can go over.
Yeah, 1. That's good. We can do it in 1. I really enjoyed that, Daniel, in that you hear people talk about scenario planning, and how do you get started into scenario planning? And the idea was, I guess you make a list of sort of your unknowns, and your 2 biggest unknowns come to the surface, and you do a worst case, best case scenario, and you overlap those 2 things, and then identify by, just prioritizing what you think the possible top 4 are, and ask if you've got the plan in place to address it. Is that right? I hadn't seen that matrix before, so I thought that was really insightful. So thank you for that. Hopefully everybody else sees it too. So here we go. If you'll go to the little box there where I'm waving and go to the right-hand corner and pin that. So there's a little button, the 3 little buttons, you drop that down and say pin. You know what I'm talking about, guys? Pin Walt to the center. I can't see you, but I'm assuming you're pinned. And if you're pinned, then you should be enjoying a pretty large investment in a really nice webcam that should be picking up my whiteboard. So can you see my whiteboard, Alan? Share it? Good. Thank you very much. Yeah, this is a just as a little tip, it's a Logitech StreamCam 3, and it's like the #1 cam for like online gamers. So just take that away. Enjoy it. Here we go. The hardest decision, and this is sort of the agenda I'm going to cover here. We're going to talk about a little bit, set up this whole thing with a little believe, talk about Dr. Kevorkian, pluses and minuses, the hardest decision and why it's the hardest decision, black holes, someone, flower power, and then how we're trying to make this hardest decision a straightforward decision. So that's what we're working on here. And everybody can see this good. So here we go. Believe. So this is a core belief that we have at 7 Questions, 7 Promises, and we're really talking to CEOs and owners and leadership teams first. This is the belief, is that an owner, your company, is a fiction that's only given meaning and power by those who buy in, by the people who buy in. If you imagine you've got 50 people and 26 are buying into this and 24 are buying into that, then you have 2 organizations. You've already been divided on your way to being conquered. And when we talk about being bought in, you as a leadership team and owners need to create clarity and consistency. Clarity and consistency in 3 different areas: operational clarity, consistency, cultural clarity, consistency, and structural clarity, consistency. We spend our time in all 3 of those areas. Today, we're digging pretty deep into the structural side. We spend a whole lot of time implementing this thing called the entrepreneurial operating system, and that's how we create that's how we create operational structure. Damn it, operational clarity and consistency. And I like to think about that as like a big wheel, and the team gets on and they learn how to ride it. And it's a lot like riding a unicycle. You know, you learn how to ride the unicycle, you can make the business go forward, but a unicycle is kind of hard to ride. You got to always pedal it to make it stay up. We want to come in here and add a couple of other components, a structural component and a cultural component, and you turn this unicycle into a tricycle, and anybody can ride that. Sort of the idea. That's what we do every day with clients. And so you see a little bit of perspective where we're coming from here. Dr. Kevorkian. So right at the beginning of this COVID thing, I was like, oh man, this is going to really suck for my customers and my clients. They're going to have to be making a lot of really hard decisions. And then the PPP money came in and everybody got a little bit of a break. And I was all kind of fired up, and I went into the kitchen one morning and I'm talking to Ann, my beautiful wife of 30 years. And I'm like, Ann, I just got to get this message out. And I just, have to help people with this decision, this hardest decision. And I start going through my thoughts with her. Of course, she's lived with this entrepreneurial person for all these years, so she's worn out. But I tell her this story, and she goes, that is the worst thing I've ever heard of. You're going to be seen as the Dr. Kevorkian of business coaches. You can't do that, Walt. So I decided not to do it. And then about 3 weeks ago, I get together with this group of trusted advisors, this thing called Spark. We had a meeting in a parking lot, and I was telling them the Dr. Kevorkian story, and they said, actually, Walt, no, you need to press that message out. So here we are. Sorry, Ann, I've chosen B. We're going with the Dr. Kevorkian story. So, I think it makes sense. Hopefully you're laughing. It's okay to laugh. We have a storm coming. There is going to be a second piece. I've made a bunch of phone calls out there. Daniel's talking about whether you got rotten information or not. I'm making a lot of phone calls, and I'm talking to the owners, and they're like, I'm not sure. But I feel like there's probably going to be another squall, another storm that's going to come once this PPP thing rolls through. Something's going to happen, and many of us are going to be faced with a hard decision. And I look at my clients out there. Some of them are thriving in this world. Some of them are kind of coming out of hibernation, and some of them, this has been an extinction event, which is really negative. I'm talking probably more about the hibernators, uncertain folks. And the cool thing about this, when this squall comes in, there's a positive and a negative. There's actually, if you've got a pretty good company and you're running this thing really well through this squall, there are going to be some ships out there that are part of your competitors that are going to sink, and you're going to have an opportunity to bring people on. So this is an opportunity as the economy drops to actually strengthen your team. And the other side of it is the negative part. Good news is the approach I'm going to show you works for both. But the negative part is if we see a big squall coming, we got to prepare for it. And we need to plan in advance and have a game plan so that when this thing comes, if we need to lighten the load and batten down the hatches, sometimes there's going to be some humans, some people that we really don't need to have on the ship if we want our ship to survive. That's this hard thing we're dealing with. And you might say, oh, that really sounds like a really hard decision to make as a CEO, because you're dealing with people and their families and all this kind of stuff. And while, yes, that's a really hard decision, because you got to save the ship. You can't carry these people along if they're going to sink the ship for you. The reason why it's the hardest decision is because it's a black hole of information. You're going to let somebody go, but at the end of the day, it's the least informed decision. You really don't know what they're doing very often. And you haven't had the guts to step into it and figure out exactly where they was. So we got to clean this black hole up. And to describe it a little bit more is, so you've made this decision, you're going to save the ship, you're going to save the company, and you got to let a few people go. And if this squall does hit, these are the people who are going to be let go. You don't walk up to them. We're going to call them someone, if that's okay. You don't walk up to someone and say, hey, someone, can we carve out about 2 hours for us to sit down and map out exactly what you're doing every day, who you're talking to, what systems you're following, what meetings you're part of, what projects you got in flow? You're never always going to do that. So it's just this black hole of information. So the way we go about getting ready for this, if we think a storm's going to hit, we need to make the most important decision and the most important list of our life. And I'm kind of putting out a scenario here that we aren't just cutting some fat, that we're actually getting into the point where we might be cutting into some muscle and cutting into some bone, is where I'm kind of assuming. If we got to make the kind of cut to keep us going, you know, the easy fat cuts are pretty simple. You can make that list pretty quickly. And if you make this list of who goes first, the spot I'm trying for us to start to look at pretty heavy is this area between, like, where it starts getting into muscle and possibly into bone. Fair enough? That's what we're shooting here. So you make this list, you get down to this area that, hey, we're getting ready to make a really hard decision on a very specific person. We take this someone and we write just somebody here on the list. And this is the method I want to go through here. Are you following me here, Sherry? You following me, Alan? Alan, I can see your screen. Are you good, Sherry? Okay. So how do we make this decision about making sure that this is not the hardest decision because it has no information? We're talking about letting somebody go. We take somebody and we're going to follow this process we call the flower power exercise. Pretty simple. A lot of you guys are clients have already seen the flower power. We put somebody in the center of a board, and then we surround this whiteboard with people who know what somebody's doing. Of course, these are people who are not going to cut. And this is a hard kind of decision you got to make, but you say, okay, who in the business knows what somebody's doing? It might be 2 or 3 people. And you get those people around the room and say, hey, I got this scenario we need to run through. We might be letting somebody go. I want y'all to take just a few quiet minutes and a piece of paper and write down a list, lift up above the business, look down at what somebody's doing and make this list. This is a really important question. You're saying, what is somebody doing and thinking about that can't drop through the cracks, handling every second, every minute, every hour, every day, every week, every month, every quarter, every year. So it's just as you're trying to get super granular on what somebody is doing. And you ask these 3 or 4 people to make a list, they might need to have as many as 18 to 20 different items on the list. What can't drop the crack every second, every minute, every hour, every day? Y'all get the idea. And they make this list, and then you go to the board and you just go to person number 1 and say, what's your idea, person number 1? And they give you an idea. You go to person number 2, what's your idea? And they say, this is what I see them doing. Go to number 3, they say, this is what I see them doing. Get back around to yourself, and you add something to the list, and you say, actually falls up into here. And you just keep going around, and you're doing like a real-time sort on the board with these lists. You keep going around one person at a time. They can only give you one item. It's not, if you don't let it be a free-for-all, because it'll be horrible. One at a time, going around the room. Give me your item. Somebody will say, give you an item, and you'll go, is that kind of like in this area here? Is that kind of there? And they'll go, yeah, it seems like it's there. Another piece. You get the idea, guys. And what's going to happen is you go around, you're going to extract all 15 to 20 items from the people's list. When they feel like their list is exhausted, they just say pass, but you got to keep going around and ask them every time because they might come up with some kind of idea. But basically, the list ends up looking like this. It's a board with these different areas around what somebody's doing every day, what we might call their positions or their roles. And then we turn it into this really pretty little flower by drawing petals around the items. That's why it's called the flower powers. It ends up looking like a petal. We'll send you a PowerPoint. You can also go over here. If you Google how to downsize your company properly, this video is there. You get these petals. Next step, you number them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You go to another piece of paper like this. You write 1 through 9 down here. You put funny here. You put serious here. You have the 4 people in the room with you. Look at each one of these categories, and then they make a list on their own where they name number 1 and name number 2, name number 3, and you have them name it in a funny name. And then you have them also name it using a serious name of what the positions are. The reason we do this is that to make your brain free up and really see these. Another step, if you have enough people, you can have people compare the list. And ultimately, you come back in and you decide this is what we're going to call number 1, this is number 2, this is number 3, this is number 4, number 5, number 6, number 7, number 8, number 9. So you have this list of all the positions that somebody was doing. And then from this list, we can understand how we're going to distribute all the stuff somebody was doing. Cool thing about this exercise is very often you're going to find that you had no idea that anybody was even doing these 2 things. So those are going to need to go to somebody. And then these parts here can go to someone else. Sorry, we're getting rid of somebody. But these positions in this list of items would go to someone else. So you don't have any gaps as we move forward. So what we do is we take this really hard decision that's unknown, and we fill this black hole with all of this data, and now we're prepared to move forward. Cool? This is also just a little nugget. I was on the phone the other day. His name is Byron Burns, and he's the CEO over at Inventions. I don't know if you got the Cork guys, and we've been teaching them this piece. And he says, I had somebody come 2 weeks ago and put in their resignation. And so what we did is when they put in the resignation, we just pulled them in a room, surrounded them with 4 other people that know what they're doing. They created this flower power with all the positions, and the transition went really, really well. Little stuff like that. Easy, simple tools. Questions? Ingrid, Sydney, Rainer, Lisa, Chuck? So we got to make some kind of
good, Walt.
So Walt, why did Ann think you were going to be Dr. Kevorkian?
You know, you just like going out and teaching people how to, you know, how cold is that, man? Teaching people how to like
Be good at letting people go.
Yeah. You know, at the end of the day, it's horrible. I hate it. I don't enjoy it. But at the same time, you know, holding people until you run into the ditch is just insanity. Right? It's hard.
There's a flip side of this too, though. You mentioned the plus and the minus, and the plus could be that, you know, some other, as you characterize them, your competitors or their ship is sinking. There's going to be some talent out in the marketplace. Yeah. What about this exercise to identify, you know, what good looks like for how we could be picking people up?
Put a superstar in the center. Have a superstar in the room. Surround them with people. Figure out what all they're doing every day. The thing with this, that we normally do this in peacetime. You know, when things aren't hitting the fan, we come in and say, well, now what's everybody doing? We have 2 exercises. One is called pulling teeth, cracking eggs, making omelets. It feels like it is. And then we do the flower power, which is more individual focused. But we do this exercise throughout the whole organization to create an awareness of all the different roles and positions people are filling. And then when you have awareness of the positions, then we can really map to meetings and objectives and all sorts of stuff. But this is so we normally do this in peacetime just to get a clear understanding of what everybody's doing. And very often when you do this with somebody who's already in your organization, you know that they're doing 1, 2, 9, 8, 7, and 6, but you didn't really realize that they were actually doing 3, 4, and 5. Is that what you were asking, Alan?
Yeah, and in that scenario, 3, 4, and 5 also might just be kind of like a barnacle that's attached to that superstar. That another byproduct would be that they don't need to be doing that anymore, right?
Yeah, that's not their highest and best use. 3, 4, and 5, I call them. He picks up a barnacle, kind of like a barnacle on a post, and things that just accrete. So you have a superstar, somebody's a really great go-getter, and they raise their hand one time to volunteer for something, and it's really not their job, and they keep doing it. That's like a barnacle that attaches to them. And by getting this out in the open, we can go, well, why are you doing that? We actually have somebody else that's over there taking care of that. Let's remove that barnacle off of you so you can go faster and just focus on your most key positions and roles.
So Ingrid's got a question that she's posed. Said, had someone leave recently, and we had completed the flower power for her position, and we were able to quickly transition her positions. Eliminates the stress to have it ready, meaning the flower power. What's the best way to keep everything up to date in a fast-paced, changing, growing organization?
Why don't we let Ingrid use that in her real words? Lay it on us, Ingrid. Off mute and say that. I know Ingrid, so sorry. I know her really well, so it's not being obnoxious here, y'all.
You're not putting me on the spot. What were you? You want me to ask the question in my real words? Yeah, it was extremely helpful when we had somebody leave recently, and she was an integral part of our business that's growing. We were able to quickly transition all of the positions that she held to other people as we look to backfill her position with someone new. But what's the best way to keep it all up to date? We're a very fast-paced, changing, growing organization. Things are moving faster sometimes than we can keep up with all the pedals for everybody and who's doing what. What's the best way to keep all that up to date?
That's a great question. And I promise you guys I didn't see that, but we're in a belief that the organization's only strong as those who buy into it. And there's this seasonal rhythm in companies. And there's this meeting we teach. We call it the seasonal conversation. And in that seasonal conversation, it's only like about 15 minutes long. But inside there, you're sitting down with the individual, the leader or manager, and you're actually covering this list of positions with them every 90 days to make sure you're still on the same page. This is what they're doing. And so they go, oh yeah, I'm still doing those things, or I feel like I've taken on this new one. And so individually, you can actually keep up with that way, Ingrid. Is that clear, guys? You're just having conversations with people. The real realization is how powerful this is you do this with the superstar in the room. It doesn't take long. Surround them with 4 of their best friends. You do this piece, and there's this huge awareness and this huge cloud that gets lifted off their shoulders. Like, wow, look at all that I'm doing. What can come off, and what do I need to focus on? And they're the ones that really need to keep up with the inventory, ultimately, of all the positions they hold. You have to store it somewhere, of course.
Well, where I see this being quite powerful is if your superstar ends up having too much on his or her plate, by looking at all of this, you can start deciding which of these you're going to hand out to someone else. That's a great opportunity. Where I also think this is great, where I've seen it with customers, is if you want to go and hire the next 2 or 3 people, quite often the owner or the leaders do not necessarily have that full picture. And when they have to put a ideal candidate profile together, they sometimes miss some of these aspects. So they therefore hire someone that's not the right person in the right seat because they miss something. So if you do exercise like this, where I see this becoming clear, you having a sense of it, it's going to help you to better create that ideal candidate profile. Then you can use tools like the Smith's Cultural Index tool to properly filter for the right people that's coming into the organization, because we all know that there is about a 60 to 70% variance between top performers and bottom performers. And this is a great tool in combination with some of these other aspects to make sure you hire only superstars.